I'm now going to start the recording.
This meeting is being recorded.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order for the May 21st meeting of the California Board of Psychology. Ms. Berto, could you please call the roll to establish quorum?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can, Ms. Berto.
Great. Okay, sorry. I'm not sure what happened there. All right, Kasuga.
Here.
Cervantes. Fu.
Here.
Harb Sheets.
Here.
Nystrom.
Here.
Phillips.
Here.
Riscate.
I'm definitely here.
Rogers.
Here.
Tate.
Here.
Roll is complete.
Thank you so much, Ms. Berto. Quorum being established. I'm going to ask that our colleagues at Solid go ahead and walk us through the process by which we make public comments and how today's meeting will be run. I think most folks are familiar by now, but given the continued use of WebEx, just wanted to make sure that folks have an opportunity to understand how we'll go ahead and take those issues. So, Solid?
Thank you, Board President. I would like to remind board members and staff who are not speaking to please mute their microphone if background noise is detected during the meeting. As a result of unmuted microphones, I will provide a brief reminder or simply mute microphones as to not interrupt the meeting. There are members in the public and meeting minutes are being taken, so I recommend that board members and staff please identify themselves before speaking. And now to facilitate public comment, the board will be utilizing the WebEx question and answer or the Q&A feature. When the board president reaches a point in the agenda at which public comment is appropriate, public comment will be requested. At the board's direction, I will turn on and announce the opening of the Q&A feature. Members of the public can indicate they would like to make a comment by clicking on the Q&A icon located at the bottom right corner of the WebEx screen. These instructions will be posted on the screen each time for your reference. In the Ask field, typically in the lower right of the WebEx screen, members of the public who wish to make a public comment will type, "I would like to make a public comment," and send it to all panelists. Any other communications will not be responded to. Members of the public, it is not necessary to identify yourselves in order to make a public comment. I will call on the requests and move on in order that they are received. Please note that the Q&A feature is being used only as a means for the members of the public to represent that they would like to make a verbal comment. Once unmuted, the member of the public may verbally state their comment. If any attendee utilizes a profane name, they will not be called upon to prevent members of the public from being subjected to profane language. While you are free to express criticism for the sake of the members of the public participating on the call, please do not use any profane language when making comments to the board. And also please note that the hand raising feature is being used by the board members and staff to facilitate discussion. Members of the public, please use the Q&A feature to submit your requests. Thank you. Back to you, Board President.
Thank you so much, Madam Moderator, for walking us through. We really appreciate it, and we appreciate the partnership with Solid. So we'll go ahead and take up item number 2. The Board of Psychology protects consumers of psychological services by licensing psychologists, regulating the practice of psychology, and supporting the evolution of the profession. As a part of our welcome today, just providing an overview of how we'll take today's events. We will be taking up items 8 and 9 after public comment, which is item number 3. So we will, in terms of the next steps, we'll, after the President's welcome, we'll do public comment, then take up item 8, the budget report, and then item 9, the discussion and possible approval. discussion to accommodate the schedules of some of our guests from the budget office. And then we'll resume back to our agendized items in numerical order. We endeavor to take breaks at the 60 or between the 60 and 90 minute marks, and also to take a 45-minute lunch today. And we'll work up towards that time, and folks will have a sense of it depending on where we are in the agenda. So in addition to the logistical items looking further out, the board is remaining flexible and awaiting further instructions as it relates to our August and November board meetings. While we expect that August will remain virtual and that November in person, that is dependent on several factors, including whether or not the emergency order is still in place by those dates, and how we can conduct our business by WebEx going forward if the emergency order is not in place, because we'll need to have locations identified for board members on that front. And on that related note, I should mention that today's locations of the board members are not disclosed pursuant to the provisions of Governor Gavin Newsom's Executive Order N2920, dated March 17, 2020. Board member locations nor public meeting location are provided. Public participation may be through the WebEx link that Madam Moderator just shared as provided. And if you are having trouble on the call to listen or participate, please call 916-574-7720. That's 916-574-7720. The numbers and information are listed both on our website as well as the board meeting agenda for today. I'm going to pause there to see if there are any questions from board members about all the logistical items we've covered thus far. All right, not seeing any questions. I'll have a few more comments, and that is that going into our August and November meetings, some of the information in terms of how data is presented will be changing to reflect board comments about, board comments and feedback about how we present data in a way that tells a story and that is contextualized with the agenda items. So you may notice that going forward in August and November, that when the traditional data sheets you get may look different, and that's to incorporate the feedback from stakeholders about contextualizing the data in a more meaningful way. So know that that is coming, and we definitely will welcome feedback in those meetings as well as how to further clarify and make that information useful for everyone. So with that, is there any public comment on the President's welcome?
This is the moderator. I'm opening up the Q&A. Members of the public, if you would like to participate, click on the Q&A icon located at the bottom right corner of your WebEx screen and type, "I would like to make a comment," and send it to all panelists. The instructions are on your screen for your reference.
And while we await public comment for item number 2, we'll also I'll also make note about item number 3 with regard to public comment for items not on the agenda. Before I invite the speakers to come forward for item number 3, I would ask individuals making comments not discuss the specifics, including names, as to pending complaints, pending licensing applications, or pending disciplinary actions that may come before the board for a decision. Such discussions are considered ex parte communications, as they could provide information to members that is outside of the record in violation of the Administrative Procedure Act. Therefore, such discussions may create a conflict and interfere with the board's capacity to make necessary determinations. Board staff is available to speak to you individually and answer your questions outside of the hearing of board members. You can always email our board staff at BOPmail. And the board members will, board staff can provide that email as well. It's on our website as well. The board is eager to listen attentively to your comments, and while there may be a desire to engage in further discussion with comments presented during this time, the board may not discuss or take action on any matter raised during this public comment section, except to decide whether to place the matter on the agenda for a future meeting. And I know this may give the impression that we're not being responsive given the context of this item, but these procedures are critical to ensuring the compliance with the Open Meetings Act and to avoid compromising the speaker's goals or the board's missions. So seeing no further comment on item number 2, we'll go ahead and open public comment for item number 3, for public comment on items not on the agenda.
This is the moderator. If you would like to submit a request, please click on that Q&A icon and type "I would like to make a comment" and send it to all panelists. And again, that's for agenda item number 3, public comments for items not on the agenda. Board President, no requests have been submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Please do, and I really appreciate it, Madam Moderator.
Thank you.
So that we're going to turn to item number 8 to Mr. Glass-Steagall for the budget report.
Good morning. Beginning on page 43 of 76 in your hand carry materials is agenda item 8, which is the budget report. Included with this report is the expenditure report through fiscal month 9, which is March of this year. There's a discretionary versus non-discretionary expense breakdown, the board's current fund condition, and a comparison of expenditure versus revenue anticipated and actual. I'm available for any questions that anybody may have.
And just a note that the budget report for item number 8 was a hand carry. So so depending on where folks are looking, you might see it as a separate item in hand carry.
Jason, this is Julie Nystrom. I have a question. For the budget, does it reflect the Board of Psychology's contract with Department of Justice?
Yes. The AG expenditures are reflected in, I believe, CMP external. And there's I also have Renee Milano from the budget office with us, and I defer to her if I'm in the wrong place for that.
I believe that is correct, yes. I also just wanted to note the AG augmentation and OAH augmentation are both included in these projections.
Okay, I appreciate that. And then I understand that the AG's rates have increased a bit over time. Can either one of you talk about that?
There has been a recent increase to our AG and OAH fees. We're currently working on trying to make sure that all of our budgets are able to support that additional cost. And luckily, these AG augmentations are sort of that bridge between that gap.
And this is Jason. I was informed by the Attorney General's office that there has been only one increase over the last 10 years.
Okay, I appreciate that. And then is there discussion, well, at least this time around, that they had anticipated their rates to increase?
I'm unaware of any discussion on any new rate increases.
Okay,
I'm not aware of anything either.
Is that something that we can continue to communicate with the AG's office about just so that way it seems that their increases went up pretty significant, and I can appreciate if they haven't raised their rates in 10 years or so, but to be able to give DCA boards, the ability to manage those cost increases better, more of a being part of the discussion would be useful. So I don't know if we can have more conversations with them going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nystrom. Mr. Glassbeagle, I do have a question for you on attachments C and D with relation to the expenditure and revenue. I noticed that expenditure is coming in below budgeted expectations, and revenue is coming in above budgeted above its budgeted amounts. So I'm curious to hear two things. One, what is driving the additional budgeted, the difference between the actual revenue and the budgeted revenue is my first question. And related to Ms. Nystrom's question, is that connected to the augmentation related to the board, the Department of Justice?
I am happy to speak to that. Regarding the actual versus budgeted revenue, the Department of Consumer Affairs requests that all programs provide an estimated revenue yearly. And one thing that we don't include in our estimations would be enforcement revenue. And so any differences in that are generally related, the majority of that extra revenue is related to enforcement, cite and fines, cost recovery, things that are variable numbers every year. Related to additional revenue increasing the board's months in reserve, that is correct. It's generally not much, but it would, for instance, if we are at 14.3 and we have an additional enough of an additional revenue, we could go to 14.5 or something similar. But it's usually not enough to move an entire year's worth, a fiscal insolvency or something like that over an entire year. And I believe, did that answer your question, President Fu?
It does, and I have a follow-up question actually related to that. So I think just by looking at the attachment D, the revenue came in at an additional $800,000 in addition to what was budgeted. And this is likely going to be connected to the other item, but I'm curious to hear from you, given the additional revenue that exceeded projections, how would that overall impact the structural fund imbalance that we've been in discussion about? And has the situation changed in terms of how we talk about the board's fund condition and the different options for further revenue, given that we had an additional $800,000 come in this year?
The conversation has not changed from the year that we believe we will reach insolvency, but any additional revenue we gain does prolong that. $1 million out of our $800,000 out of our $5 to $6 million budget would only buy us a few months, or a few pieces of months, or even a month or two. But it's not. It wouldn't change an entire year's projection, unfortunately. But it is helpful to have the additional revenue as a cushion, just in case.
Understood, Mr. Glass-Steagall. I think that's all the questions I have for now for this budget report. Board members, are there further questions for Mr. Glass-Steagall? Not seeing any mics unmuted, I'm going to go ahead and turn to public comment for item number 8.
I apologize. This is Renee from the Budget Office. I just wanted to clarify one point. The AG and OAH augmentations are housed in contracts internal, not external. I apologize.
Thank you for the clarification.
All right, we can go to public comment.
This is the moderator. I've opened up the Q&A at the request of the board. Members of the public, you can click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right corner of your WebEx screen and type, "I would like to make a comment," and send it to all panelists. Board President, no requests have been submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Please do, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to turn it back to the board and see if there are any further questions. And I'm not seeing any mics unmuted or hands raised, so I'm going to go ahead and move to item number 9. Mr. Glass-Steagall?
Thank you very much, President Fu. Good morning, board members. During the February board meeting, I discussed the board's long-standing structural imbalance, causing a reduction to the board's months in reserve, which indicates how many months the board will be able to operate should the board stop receiving revenue. During that presentation, I discussed a two-part approach. The first part is to promulgate regulations intended to raise all fees to the statutory maximum. The second part will be to conduct a third-party fee analysis and subsequently seek legislation for the appropriate fees for the board to continue to operate without a structural imbalance. To begin the first part of the two-part process, staff identified all fees that are not yet at the statutory cap. This can be found as part of Agenda Item 9, which begins on page 19 of the combined meeting materials. In addition to the language identified as part of the hand carry materials, on page 49 of 76, staff prepared a fee history to show which of the board's fees have changed since the board's inception. Lastly, after reviewing the board's pending regulatory packages, staff requests the authority to make conforming changes to these sections to account for the changes to the same sections and other regulatory packages. To do this, should the board move staff's requested motion, we ask that you insert the phrase conforming changes as part of the delegation to the executive officer. And staff have an updated recommended motion, which is as follows. Staff requests the board approve the proposed regulatory changes to 16 CCR, sections 1392 and 1392.1. Direct the executive officer to take all steps necessary to initiate the rulemaking process, authorize the executive officer to make any technical or non-substantive changes to the rulemaking package as necessary, including any conforming changes with language previously approved by the board. Notice the proposed text for a 45-day comment period with the Office of Administrative Law, hold a hearing on the proposal, and if no adverse comments are received during the 45-day comment period or hearing, adopt the proposed regulatory changes. Thank you, and I am available for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Glass-Steagall. So a couple things. I want to draw attention, the board's attention and attendees' attention to the hand carry for item 9. This is related to attachment B. It provides a fee history for the board that breaks out the different fees that are related and that would be potentially impacted. Of note, I think, is as we discussed this, is that The application fee of $40 was set in 1979. The continuing education evaluation fee was set in 2013. The renewal fees were also set in 1979 as well. And that if you have any additional questions related to this hand carry, that Mr. Glassspiegel is here to answer any questions on both the two-part approach as well as the attachment. So I do see Ms. Nystrom's hand raised, so I'll turn it to Ms. Nystrom.
Thank you. One question that I have is in part 2, and this discussion is to hire an independent company to conduct a fee analysis. And I guess my question there is, while the independent company will do a fee analysis, will they also be an audit, or will they analyze any efficiencies or ways to reduce our operational costs?
This is Jason. I have not been involved in a fee analysis before, so I will turn it over to Ms. Sork or the DCA Budget Office that may have been involved in these previously.
Hi, this is Antoinette. I just want to briefly start this conversation out, and then I will hand it over to the budget folks to speak more directly about the fee audit, because I haven't directly been involved in a fee audit in my time with the department. So I will just mention that we are working with the Department of Consumer Affairs, going through the SOLID unit, evaluating all of our 3 different units processes. Every step of the process in Breeze, every paper process for renewals, applications, licensure review, and enforcement process. We have gone through the initial steps. It's part of our strategic plan, and you will probably remember seeing it in my executive officer's report. It's called OIO, and it's a review of how we do our business and if we can find any efficiencies. This process is aimed at doing that. So that's something that it's a service that the Department of Consumer Affairs is providing through pro rata services. And then the fee study would be a separate process apart from the OIO. So I will hand it over to budgets to talk more specifically about fee studies.
Good morning. This is Matt Nishamini from the Budget Office. Thank you for the invitation again. I spoke at the February meeting and we kind of laid out this plan. So thank you again for having me. As far as fee studies, we do these all the time for the programs that are seeking statutory changes. They typically do not include efficiency studies. And it's my understanding, and I think this was mentioned in the February meeting, that the board did undergo some sort of internal efficiency study maybe in the past year or so. That certainly could be included in a contract, but a typical fee analysis what it does is, so for example, you have 2 basic type of fees. You've got an initial application fee or those types, and then you have renewal fees. So initial license fees or similar fees, initial fees, what the analysis does is it figures out how much it costs to actually process that fee type. So for your initial application, the applicant submits documentation, the application, maybe educational requirements, and board staff goes through that, and based on the hours and the job classifications that it takes to process that application through the system for approval or denial, those are all weighed and it's just calculated. It's a very linear calculation. So for example, it takes 10 hours of AGPA work at a cost of say $80 per hour, and it's $800. So it's very linear. For renewal application, more inputs go into that. So those inputs would be your enforcement related activities. So if you, in some cases for renewals, the workload is going to be less because typically you have licensees in good standing reapplying for licensure. And so that process, the administrative process can be leaner. However, we would include the enforcement related activities. So that would include D of I, Department of Investigations, if you have an internal enforcement related staff, and it would also include your AG and your OAH costs. So that is why renewal applications are always higher than initial applications. And that makes sense because your enforcement related activities are typically conducted against licensees. Now, you could take an enforcement action against an unlicensed activity, but for the most part, your board deliberations and the process that you go are taken against existing licensees. And so that's why the existing licensees pay for those activities through the renewal fee. Did I answer your question?
Thank you, Matt. Yes, you did. I appreciate your response, and Antoinette, I appreciate your response as well. And I did see it in the executive officer report that there'll be an internal review of processes, and so I appreciate that. I just trying to think outside the box of ways to keep costs down as much as possible. I appreciate everybody's response. Thank you.
So I'm not seeing any further hands from the board, but I would say that in terms of this item, I think what I would need from board members would be a approval of a motion, to approve the proposed regulatory changes to 16 California Code of Regulations, sections 1392 and 1392.1.
This is Dr. Harbsheets. I so move.
Thank you, Dr. Harbsheets. Can I also add to your motion to direct to the executive officer to take all steps necessary to initiate the rulemaking process, authorize the EO to make any technical or non-substantive changes to the rulemaking package as necessary, and to notice a proposed text for 45 comment period with the Office of Administrative Law, hold a hearing on the proposal, and if no adverse comments are received during the 45-day comment period, to adopt the proposed regulatory changes?
Yes, so my motion is as written in the document, which is what you read. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Harbsheets.
And this is Leah Tate. I'm happy to second.
And thank you, Dr. Tate. All right, so I have a motion before us on this front. I don't see any further board discussion, but sorry, Mr. Glass-Steagall?
Hello, I just want to make sure we include the slight addition of the conforming changes as well.
Duly noted. Dr. Harbsheets, I'm assuming no opposition to that?
Correct.
All right. And so the motion's long. It is, yes.
Sorry to interrupt. This is Will, Board Counsel McGuire. I just wanted to make sure the seconder was also okay with the motion as verbally amended just now by, as suggested by Jason.
Yes.
Excellent.
Thank you, Mr. McGuire. So I'm going to turn this over to public comment, given the fact that we have a motion on the table. So, Madam Moderator, could you please open public comment?
Yes, this is the moderator. Members of the public, if you would like to participate, click on the Q&A icon located at the bottom right corner of your WebEx screen and type, "I would like to make a comment," and send it to all panelists. Board President, no requests have been submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Apologies, Madam Moderator, I was unmuted. I'm going to hold it open for 30 more seconds just in case folks are having technical difficulties. I'm not aware of any, but just want to make sure that our attendees have an opportunity to weigh in. All right, thank you so much, Madam Moderator. You can go ahead and close Q&A.
Thank you.
So I'm going to turn this back over to the board for further board discussion on the motion before us. Board members, are there additional questions on this item? I'm not seeing any hands muted, hands up or mics unmuted. So I'm going to go ahead and ask Ms. Bertot to go ahead and call the roll.
Kasuga?
Aye.
Fu?
Aye.
Harb Sheets?
Aye.
Nystrom?
Aye.
Phillips?
Aye.
Riscate?
Aye.
Rogers?
Aye.
Tate?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. The motion carries. Mr. Glass-Steagall, Mr. McGuire, any further action requested from the board for consideration related to item number 9?
None here.
No, none for me either. Thank you.
All right. Okay. So we will now then turn back to item number 4, which was the minutes for February 18th and 19th. This was a hand carry in our items. So you can turn to that. Are there any edits or corrections to the minutes that are substantive? Dr. Phillips.
Yes, let me switch between screens here. So we're on item number 4. Yeah, and looking through the minutes, it appeared at several places that the vote tallies were not representative of what happened. So I want to kind of go back through. I'll see where in particular. Okay. At page 15, just getting to page 15 now, at line 663, it says vote 9 ayes, 1 abstention. I think that gives us one more board member than we have. I think it should be 8 ayes and 1 abstention. Does anybody need me to pause there for a sec, or is that self-explanatory?
I think self-explanatory, Dr. Phillips, but if I can have verbal confirmation from staff that after each time Dr. Phillips requests a correction to just acknowledge that we have that, please.
Absolutely.
Okay, the next one would be at page 18, line 775. This is, I think this relates to Ms. Nystrom having recused herself from voting in this particular situation. I don't know how it should be correctly recorded. It says vote 8 ayes, 1 abstain. I don't know if a recusal is considered an abstention, Mr. McGuire.
I think it's, for our purposes here, it's sufficiently similar. If the board wishes to use a different term that's more specific, they're welcome to make that change here and now. But I think it's sort of a distinction without a difference.
Okay. Yeah, I'm fine with the use of that term. I do think Ms. Nystrom's name should appear after 1 abstain then.
That's probably a good idea.
I would actually say, Dr. Phillips, that there is a difference between an abstention and not voting, right? Like the abstention is, to me, connotes like an active act that is happening. Well, yeah, go ahead, Dr.
Sorry to interrupt you, President Fu. I was just thinking it through. I think the recusal at least implies that in this case, Ms. Nystrom didn't participate in the discussion at all, or even wasn't present for that item. If we want to use recusal in that sense to be, I think that's literally what it was here. But someone could abstain or no vote potentially just if they went to the restroom or something and missed the vote on that particular item. Or they, as you say, actively said, I have no vote on this, but they didn't necessarily recuse themselves from consideration of it. So that's why I say it's all kind of the same thing, but it depends how precise we want to be here in our meeting minutes, and that's it.
I would think that the better way to approach this is, since it says immediately before the vote, Ms. Nystrom recused herself, I think it should say vote 8 ayes, 0 noes. And just
that works.
Attention.
Yeah.
Does that answer your concern, Mr. Fu?
It does. Thank you. Okay.
And then the final time I noticed this was at page 26, line 1174. It says vote 9 ayes, 1 no. Again, the numbers don't match. I believe it's vote 8 ayes, 1 no. And that's the final comment that I have.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. Those are extremely helpful and that'll reflect the record of events. Are there additional edits to the February 18th and 19th board meeting minutes?
This is Dr. Harp Sheets. And let me look what number. I have to switch screens also. I think it's number 7, line 70 something. Hold on, I'm going to bring it back up. And it's just line 70, and it should be an apostrophe under President's report. So I know it's picky, but we should make it accurate. President apostrophe S.
That's fantastic. No, we love it. So thank you, Dr. Harp Sheets.
Okay. Yeah.
Any additional edits from board members? And if not, may I consider, Dr. Phillips, that a motion was made by you to amend, to adopt the minutes as amended, and the second coming from Dr. Harp Sheets?
So moved.
So moved.
All right. So I'm not seeing any further board discussion. I will go ahead and turn it over for public comment.
This is the moderator. Members of the public, if you would like to participate, click on the Q&A icon located at the bottom right corner of your WebEx screen and type, "I would like to make a comment," and send it to all panelists. Board President, no requests have been submitted. Would you like to close the Q&A feature?
Thank you so much, Madam Moderator. Please do.
Thank you.
All right, back to board discussion. I just got a notice that Dr. Harp Sheets was bumped off the call, and it may not be able to vote. So before we do take a vote, I just want to make sure we can do that. So let me confirm. Could a staff member reach out to Dr. Herb Sheets just to check in on the technical situation? Um,
I'm checking with Dr. Harb Sheets right now.
Thank you. Given the fact that Dr. Harp Sheets made the motion, I want to make sure she's present to vote. Staff is working with Dr. Harp Sheets to bring her back online, so you may hear silence as we go ahead and work to do that. All right, it looks like Dr. Harp Sheets is trying to get on. So while we resolve this, I think what we'll do is we'll go ahead and just take a 10-minute break and return at 10:10. back on item 5 for, excuse me, on item 4 for a vote, and then we'll turn to item 5. So the board will be in recess for 10 minutes to resolve technical issues. Thank you. We just take a quorum call and ask Ms. Porto to call the roll quickly so that we can make sure that everyone's here.
Sure. Kasuga?
Here.
Fu?
Here.
Harpsheets?
Here.
Nystrom?
Here.
Phillips?
Here.
Riscate?
Here.
Rogers?
Here.
Tate?
Here.
Roll's complete.
All right. Okay. So with that, we're going to go back to item number 4. This is related to our February minutes. We have a motion from Dr. Phillips and a second by Dr. Harpsheets to adopt the minutes as amended. And so with that, and we have had public comment on it, we've had board comments on it, so we'll go ahead and call the roll now for that motion to adopt as amended the February 18th, 19th minutes. Ms. Porto.
Okay. Kasuga?
Aye.
Fu?
Aye.
Harpsheets?
Aye.
Nystrom?
Aye.
Phillips?
Aye.
Riscate?
Aye.
Rogers?
Aye.
Tate?
Aye.
Fantastic. Motion carries. Thank you so much, Ms. Porto. All right. Item number 5. This is related to our April board meeting minutes. And are there any, and I was going to turn to Dr. Phillips, and he raised his hand just at that moment. Dr. Phillips, we are eager to hear your amendments and changes to the April 2nd minutes. Over to you.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm switching screens again. So again, it comes in the vote counts. For purposes of consistency between minutes, at line 101, we've got 7 ayes, 0 noes, and 1 abstain. I think the abstain shouldn't be there. We might want to add a line preceding the vote saying that Ms. Nystrom recused herself. I think that happens in some places and not in others. Similarly, at line 176 on page 5, we've got 7 ayes, 1 abstain. So similar change needs to be made there. And also at line 200, same thing. And let's go to, there's a couple that are slightly different. Line 222, same thing. And in that one, it does say that Ms. Nystrom had recused herself. So I think we just need to be consistent with how we format from one to the next, given that we've adopted this new approach. And then again at 243, 266, $350, line 350. And then I draw your attention to line 467. In that particular item, it doesn't count the number of aye votes. So I think in addition to making the change that I discussed with reference to the votes above, we should actually say how many people voted. I believe it is 7 ayes, but I didn't stop to count. Yeah, I believe it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 ayes. So that should be, the actual tally should be there. And then we run into the same problem at line 476. I believe it should be 7 ayes. There should be a comment about Ms. Nystrom recusing herself. There should be no abstentions. There are 0 noes. So that's the entirety of my comments. For some reason, those just leaped out at me as I was reading through the minutes last night. So I thought I would share those with you.
Those are incredibly helpful, Dr. Phillips. Thank you so much for pointing them out. And I chuckled when you came on mic. Are there additional board edits and comments to the meeting minutes? Go ahead, Mr. McGuire.
Oh, thank you, President, for not hearing any. Just during the break, I was able to kind of confirm that the approach that we're going with now is perfectly sufficient according to Robert's Rules of Order, which don't actually touch on recusals. That's more of a technical legal issue, and I think we're just in noting it that she's recusing herself from those items is sufficient. And then since she's recused, as we've kind of alluded to, there's no vote taken. It's not a vote to abstain or a no vote. It's just a non-vote. So I think the change we're making is appropriate.
Thank you so much for the legal analysis. That's really helpful, and we'll incorporate that feedback with these minutes going forward. Thank you, Mr. McGuire. Dr. Phillips, can I have a motion from you to adopt the meeting minutes as amended?
You sure can. So moved.
May I have a second?
This is Julie Nystrom. I'll second that motion.
We have a second from Ms. Nystrom. I'm going to go ahead and turn to public comment for item number 5 related to our board meeting minutes.
This is the moderator. Members of the public, if you would like to participate, click on the Q&A icon located at the bottom right corner of your WebEx screen and type, "I would like to make a comment," and send it to all panelists. The instructions are on the screen for your reference.
Not seeing further public comment, we can go ahead and close the public comment section and bring it back to the board. Board members, any further comments from you? I see Ms. Pertot is off mute and ready to call the roll, so I'll turn it over to you, Ms. Pertot.
Thank you. Kasuga?
Aye.
Fu?
Aye.
Harpsheets? Aye.
Nystrom? Phillips?
Aye.
Riscate?
Aye.
Rogers?
Aye.
Tate?
Aye.
Sorry, Nystrom, aye.
Okay, thank you.
Motion carries. Thank you so much, Ms. Pertot. We will now turn to item number 6, the Executive Officer's Report. Ms. Sorek.
Good morning, members. Included in the meeting materials is the Executive Officer's Report. The first item is the personnel update. And as of right now, we have 3 vacancies we are looking to fill, 2 in the enforcement unit and 1 in central services. And we are actively working with the Office of Human Resources to backfill those positions. Statistical reports, as President Fu mentioned in the beginning, you will see at upcoming meetings that the statistical reports may look different from the 3 different units in the office: enforcement, central services, and licensing. And the staff is working with the targeted committees to address what kind of information is relevant and useful for the board during board discussions. For updates and reports. The next item is the 2020 Department of Consumer Affairs annual update to the legislature. At the last board meeting, the annual report was not available to provide the board. This is an annual report that the board works with the Department of Consumer Affairs on every year, which provides input and feedback on licensing, examinations, fees, and enforcement data. And this information that's provided to the legislature meets the requirements pursuant to Business and Professions Code Section 129. And 129 lays out that a report to the legislature to ascertain patterns of complaints and report such data on an annual basis should be provided every year. So the department compiles this data from all the different programs, and that information is then in turn provided to the legislature. This is an annual report that provides information to the legislature in between sunset reviews, which typically happens every 4 years for programs. The last item I have is the waivers and guidance update. As you know, I provide a waiver update to the board and staff every week. The current active waivers that the board has, there are 3 waivers that the board approved with approval from the Department of Consumer Affairs that is contingent upon there being a declaration of an emergency from the governor. Those 3 are still in place, and Mr. McGuire and myself and staff will be working with the Department of Consumer Affairs as any information trickles in about any lifting of a declared emergency. I know we spoke in the beginning about the reopening of California in June and what that may look like. At this point, staff hasn't been given any kind of indication that that also is hand in hand with the lifting of the declared emergency. So we will work with the department on how changes to the reopen of the state will impact any existing waivers. I also want to just take a step back and remind our stakeholders and board and staff that might be listening to the waiver process. In the beginning, when the emergency was declared, the department reached out to all of the programs and asked for any waivers to be submitted that would enable licensees and applicants to continue as normal as possible under the COVID situation. In line with that, the board submitted several waiver requests and has been working with the department on continuing those waivers. So once a waiver is requested of the Department of Consumer Affairs, there is an internal review process that the department works with Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency, as well as the governor's office on continuing those waivers. We do not need to resubmit or re-request. There's a long-standing request for all of our waivers to continue as long as possible for the declared emergency. So that is the current process for waivers. I have communicated that some of our stakeholders have been frustrated with the process of waivers being renewed and perhaps not in a timely enough basis to communicate to all of their own stakeholders what the requirements and expectations are of the board. For instance, with the face-to-face supervision waivers. So I just want to kind of relay that's where we are now as far as moving forward with the waiver process, waiting to see about the declared emergency, working hand in hand with the department on that. The fact that all of our waivers have been submitted, we have longstanding requests to have those continue as long as possible. And again, just to convey that we have expressed and communicated frustration level of our stakeholders in the renewal of waiver process. So that concludes my EO report, and I'm available for any questions the board might have.
Thank you so much, Ms. Sorick. Are there board questions or discussion on the report that Ms. Sorick just provided? Dr. Phillips.
Yeah, just very briefly, and thank you very much for your remarks, Ms. Sorick. We hear the stakeholders loud and clear when they say that the face-to-face licensure requirements and the short periods of time for which that waiver is extended makes it very difficult to plan supervision. We understand that and are very sympathetic to it. And we want you to know we are doing whatever is within our power to do to bring to the attention of the powers that be that we are, that this is not working effectively for purposes of planning of supervision. But unfortunately, unless we receive a much longer waiver, it appears that it's going to continue to go for a couple of months at a time. And being on the board of one training site, I understand this makes it very difficult to wait till the Friday before the waiver is going to expire, which will be on Monday, to try to ascertain whether they're going to need to go to face-to-face supervision, how that's going to be handled in the middle of the pandemic. We realize it's a nightmare, but we're doing everything that's within our power to try to address that situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. Mr. McGuire?
Thank you, President Fu. Just a comment for the board members who may not be aware and any members of the public listening as to the psychology board issued waivers. There's 3 of them. You can find on our website, and Ms. Sark referenced them. I just wanted to point out that those ones are the reason why the board is able to issue those ones on its own accord without having to go through the DCA and the agency and so forth, is because it has specific statutory authority in our Practice Act for those 3 items on a showing of good cause. And the way that all 3 of them are written now is that they're set to expire at when the state of emergency expires. So that's something that the board members should keep in mind, and we may have to address at a future meeting if we wish to extend those or consider extending those.
Thank you, Mr. McGuire. Any further board discussion on Ms. Sort's report? Seeing none, I'm going to ask Madam Moderator to please turn to public comment.
This is the moderator. I've opened the Q&A. Members of the public, if you would like to participate, click on the Q&A icon at the bottom right corner of your WebEx screen and type, "I would like to make a comment," and send it to all panelists. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. Board President, no requests have been submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please. Thank you. Madam Moderator, could you confirm that the Q&A function is working, just in large part because we have a number of attendees and I'm surprised, frankly, that there hasn't been any public comment. So, okay, never mind. Thank you, Dr. Joe Linder-Crow. All right. We just wanted to make sure that everything was working, given the way things were going technically here today for all of us with this WebEx event. So thank you to Dr. Joe Linder-Crow for confirming, and thank you to Solid for indulging my question.
Thank you.
All right, so we're going to turn to an update from the Department of Consumer Affairs, and it's my pleasure to welcome Mary Catherine Cruz-Jones with the Board and Bureau Relations to our board meeting today. Madam Moderator, if you could please identify Ms. Cruz-Jones in the attendee list and go ahead and allow her to be a panelist so that she may present.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you so much, Ms. Cruz-Jones, and thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Great, thank you. Good morning, Board President Fu and board members. I'm Mary Kate Cruz-Jones with Board and Bureau Relations at the Department of Consumer Affairs. Thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to provide a department update to your board today. On May 13th, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention announced additional updates to mask guidelines, including various circumstances when masks are not required for fully vaccinated individuals. California will keep existing mask guidance in place until June 15th, when it aims to fully reopen the economy. All employees and visitors must still wear masks while at DCA locations. While more than 15 million Californians are fully vaccinated, there are still many others that are not, and the threat of variants still remains. Californians need to remain vigilant and continue public health prevention measures like wearing masks when appropriate and getting vaccinated. DCA will continue to communicate updated guidance to boards and bureaus. DCA is receiving many questions about when and how boards and bureaus will be able to meet again in person. I do not have a definitive answer for you today, but I would like to offer some clarification. As you know, the ability of the board to meet remotely is tied to the governor's executive orders and the state of emergency. When these are lifted, the board will be required to follow all aspects of the Open Meeting Act, including publicly noticed and accessible locations. We do not yet know when this will happen or if any changes in the law will occur before that date. DCA will do all it can to assist the boards and bureaus to transition safely and with enough time to plan for in-person meetings. Boards and bureaus are looking ahead to what changes can be made permanent for efficiency and employee well-being, such as eliminating paper processes and maximizing telework where appropriate. I encourage all members and the public to visit DCA's COVID-19 webpage for updates and resources on the state's reopening plan, public health guidance, vaccinator resources, vaccine distribution, and much more. Finally, a quick reminder about required trainings for board members. 2021 is a mandatory sexual harassment prevention training year. This means that all employees, as well as board members, are required to complete the training during this year. As a reminder, newly appointed and reappointed board members are required to attend the board member orientation training within a year of appointment or reappointment. DCA is excited about the new and improved training, which has been updated based upon board member feedback and requests. The next training will be held on June 23rd via WebEx, and the final BMOT that's scheduled for 2021 will be held on October 13th. To register, please visit DCA Board Member Resource Center, which is located on DCA's webpage at dca.ca.gov. And as always, Board and Bureau Relations is here to help, and if there's anything that we can do to assist, please reach out to us. That concludes my presentation today, and I will hand it back over to President Fu. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Cruz-Jones, for your presentation. I think you got a sense just now from the previous item about our concern as it relates to the waivers. And since we have the opportunity to welcome you here today, could you just share some insights with us about just over the last year, why the waivers have been done on with such a short runway in terms of the extensions?
Sure, that's a great question, and I know that Ms. Sork and I did connect prior to this meeting, and so it's something that has been brought to the attention of the executive. I think just since this whole pandemic has been touch and go, it's really hard to anticipate how things will pan out or what things will look like. So we're trying to triage as best we can, and see how we take things in the future. This has been the process that we've been doing with all boards and bureaus, and we understand that it can be a little bit difficult, especially for your stakeholders, but we do appreciate your flexibility during this time.
Thank you, Ms. Cruz-Jones, for that. That's really helpful. I just want to follow up on the touch and go comment. I think we all understand and appreciate that managing a pandemic was not something that many folks had expected for 2020. But I do get a sense that folks did realize that, given the comments from the Department of Public Health and from Secretary Galley on numerous occasions, that we would be in this for some time. given the tier modeling that we were talking and the progression of the various counties in the tiers. What is the relationship between DCA and Health and Human Services, and what communication have, and how did those guidances from HHS inform whether or not the planning processes that were happening here at DCA in terms of those extension waivers?
Yeah, that's also a great question. I'd be happy to take notes on what you just said and provide some additional information to Ms. Sork, and she could be, in correspondence with you all as members. I would have to kind of circle back with members of executive to obtain a bit more information to be able to speak fully on that.
Understood. Thank you so much, Ms. Cruz-Jones. Really appreciate it.
Great, thank you.
Board members, is there further discussion or questions for Ms. Cruz-Jones? All right, I'm not hearing any. We're going to go ahead and turn to public comment for item number 7.
This is the moderator. I've opened up the Q&A. Members of the public, if you would like to participate, click on the Q&A icon located at the bottom right corner of your WebEx screen and type, "I would like to make a comment," and send it to all panelists. The instructions are on the screen for your reference.
All right, seeing no further public comment on this, thank you so much. Madam Moderator, we can go ahead and close the Q&A.
Thank you.
Ms. Cruz-Jones, any final thoughts for this item?
No, I think we're good at this time. Thank you very much. I will be in touch.
Thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. And we find these updates from DCA very valuable, and understand, just given the number of boards that are within the department, that y'all do a fantastic job of getting connected to the different boards and attending our board meetings. So thank you, and to the Board and Bureau Relations Division for their continued efforts to be in close contact with the boards. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, so we will move to item number 10, as we've taken up items 8 and 9 already. Ms. Chung.
Thank you, President Fu. Staff received feedback by the board regarding the statistical content of the report. So staff just want to share that, or as a reminder that to share some background information, that the data provided on the report was previously requested by the board to provide some information regarding our application workflow of the unit. So as reported previously by President Fu and Ms. Sorek, staff will seek guidance from the licensure committee in evaluating the statistical content of the report at the next licensure committee meeting that is scheduled on July 16th. And we'll ask the committee to provide staff with any appropriate feedback if there's any necessary changes to the statistical content of the report. In the meeting materials, you can find the licensing population overview in attachment A. As you may be able to find out that we have more current licensees and registrants since the last report made at the board meeting, less inactive licensed psychologists or those that are in delinquent status. Regarding our unit workload reports on the different types of application, we have observed more and processed more eligible applicants to take the EPPP exams and issuing licenses to applicants who have met all licensure requirements. Regarding our psychological assistant application workload, similar trend was also observed with more registrations issued compared to the report made since the last board meeting. For registered psychologists, we have seen a few less applications coming in our way, and there's not much differences compared to the last time. And if you were looking at the 12-month period on the workflow for the unit, there doesn't seem to be a major difference in the volumes of application notification received in the same period. So we are just noticing we have receiving a little bit more application in January of this year when we compare that to the last year. For exams, we have seen a stable trend in percentages for exam candidates on their performance. We also wanted to share again that as reported in previous board meetings, the board continues its effort in right-sizing the budget to get out of the structural deficit. Because of the budgetary impacts, our unit currently relies on 4 full-time licensing analysts to manage all the workload as shown in attachment B that you can see in this report. However, we understand that anxiousness and anxiety coming from applicants. So with the best resources available, we continue to communicate with our applicants and stakeholders, and we have made some improvement or changes. For example, we have created an automatic response for incoming inquiries that are sent to the licensing inbox so that they will be seeing us with the expected response time frame and some of the frequently asked questions that they might find helpful while waiting a response from our staff. And we also continue to prioritize the issuing of initial licenses as we really understand the eagerness and anxiousness of applicants that they really want to complete the licensure process after all the hard work they have put through in obtaining a license. And another reminder or information that I want to share is that applicants can also find the processing timeframes regarding the review of exam eligibility, expected time frame in getting a response for correspondence sent to staff, and the issuance of initial licenses and registrations. This information is also shared on the board's social media platform, and this statistics is updated on a monthly basis to give the public an idea of where we are with applications and things. This concludes my report, and happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Ms. Chung. And I just want to draw the board's attention to some of the statistics in the attachments. We've heard previously from the board to have a year-by-year comparison for different items. And so you'll see on attachments D, E, F, G, that year-to-year comparison that we didn't have previously, on D and E for the year-to-year comparisons we didn't have previously. So we're able to now look at those two attachments within that 4 to 5 year time frame that's available. And just want to thank Ms. Chung for hearing some of that feedback and then working in a going forward basis with the licensure committee and Dr. Harb Sheets as chair of that committee, and also thinking through how these reports could better reflect the information that all of us are trying to seek as a part of this. So thank you, Ms. Chung. Are there board comments or discussions and questions to Ms. Chung on this? All right, seeing and hearing none, can we go ahead and please open the the public comment, please, Madam Moderator?
Yes, this is the moderator. Members of the public, if you would like to participate, click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right corner of your WebEx screen and type, "I would like to make a comment," and send it to all panelists. The instructions are on the screen for your reference.
We have a comment from Colleen Kennedy.
Colleen, I will unmute your microphone now.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you for allowing me to participate in your meeting today. I just had a quick question. I recently passed the EPPP, and I was really surprised at the process then to take the CAPLE. in that we have to actually fill out a paper application, send it in, and send it in with a paper check. And so I was wondering if that process could be automated, so that we're not sitting for yet like another month to be able to try and sit for that next exam. Because every day that you guys are sitting on our applications are days that we can't get out and earn a living. So it's not just getting out there and working, but this really financially impacts your applicants as well. And the process is very slow, or has been very slow for me. I'm not sure about everybody else, but that just really prolongs the process when we have to send everything through the snail mail instead of just zipping our credit card through and saying that, yes, we want to sit for that exam.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kennedy. We'll after the conclusion of public comments, we'll turn it. I'll ask Ms. Chung that question that you just posed. So I really appreciate your participation today and asking us about opportunities for efficiencies here at the board.
Board President, no further requests have been submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please. And I'm going to turn this over to Ms. Chung on that question that we heard with regard to being able to submit things electronically and how we can think through the board's commitment to go paper light, I think is what we've heard in the past as it relates to taking the complete exam. So Ms. Chung?
Thank you, President Fu. Yes, we have also been thinking of ways to improve our processes to be adhere to the board's goal in going paper light and making the process more convenient and efficient. I think I have shared this in the previous board meeting that we are looking into the opportunities or ways how we could make this process electronically available, because we have seen that this might be something doable. So we're in the exploration phase and we hope to have an update as soon as possible regarding this. But this is something that we have been thinking, and this is something that we would like to do as well. Thank
Ms.
you.
Chung, just follow up on that. Do you think you can have an update to the board before the year's end as relates to timeline and sort of next steps as it relates to that exploration?
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Perfect. Thank you.
No problem.
And of course, we'll take the lead of the licensure committee as you explore with them and the leadership of Dr. Harpsheets, who I see just went off mute. So I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Harpsheets.
I was just going to ask Ms. Chung if we could put that item on our July agenda for our meeting.
Will do. I have make a note of that.
Thank you.
No problem.
All right. I'm not seeing any further board discussion or hands raised. So we're going to go ahead and then move to item number 11. And I believe that Mr. Glass-Steagall is presenting on this, correct?
That is correct.
I remembered. Okay, that's great. All right, Mr. Glass-Steagall, please, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, board members. Included in your meeting materials on page 31 of 250 is the Continuing Education and Renewals Report. Congratulations to all board members for passing their CE audit, and that's all 5 licensed members. And for renewals between January 2021 through April 2021, 82% of psychologists renewed as active, 89% of psychologists and psychological assistants renewed their licenses online using Breeze. And the pass rate from 2015 to 2019 for audits is 80%, and the pass rate for second audits, that would be after a failed first audit, has risen from 68% in 2016 to 94%. in 2019. There are various attachments, including CE audits for 2020, pass and fail rates for 2020 audits, reasons for not passing the CE audits, pass and fail rates for first audits from 2015 through 2019, pass and fail rates for second audits, online versus mail renewals processed, and psychologist and psychological assistant renewal applications processed from January through April 2021. This is for informational purposes only, no actions required. And that concludes my report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Glass-Steagall. And again, I would like to turn the board's attention to the attachments, attachments D and E. Again, the board had requested previously, as a part of feedback about statistical reports, a year-by-year comparison so that we're able to see and identify potential any trends or patterns in the data. And so wanted to make sure that board members saw those attachments with the year-by-year comparisons that we haven't had previously. Our thanks to Ms. McCochran and Mr. Glass-Steagall for hearing that feedback and incorporating it here so that we can have a better view of some of this data going forward. Are there board questions or discussions on the continuing education and renewal report? All right, not seeing further questions or comments from the board, I will turn it over to Madam Moderator to go ahead and open for public comment.
Thank you. This is the moderator. Members of the public, if you would like to participate, click on that Q&A icon at the bottom right corner of your WebEx screen and type, "I would like to make a comment," and send it to all panelists. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. Board President, no requests have been submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm not seeing further board discussion on item number 11. So we will then turn to item number 12 for the enforcement report. So Ms. Monterrubio, could you please provide the enforcement report for agenda item number 12?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. The overview of enforcement activity and the performance measures were hand carry items. Currently, the enforcement unit has 2 vacant positions. One is an office technician and one is an associate governmental program analyst. The OT is responsible for opening complaints, corresponding with stakeholders regarding the complaint process, and provides administrative support to the enforcement staff. It has been a challenge to fill the OT position. As Ms. Sorek mentioned earlier, we've had that vacancy since 2019. We also again have a vacancy as an AGPA. That person is responsible for performing desk investigations, referring cases to the Division of Investigation in the Office of the Attorney General. Interviews for the AGPA position were held the week of April 26th through the 30th, and we are waiting to hear back from the Office of Human Resources as to whether the candidate we have selected meets the hiring requirements. Since July 1st of 2020, the board has received 973 complaints. All complaints received are opened and assigned to an enforcement analyst. Since July 1st of 2020, the board has issued 32 enforcement citations, and citations and fines are issued for minor violations. The board has referred 42 cases to the Office of the Attorney General for formal discipline. And we are currently monitoring 43 active probationers. And of the 43 probationers, 1 is out of compliance. Being out of compliance can result in a citation, fine, or further disciplinary action through the Office of the Attorney General. And that concludes my enforcement report. Are there any questions?
Board members, any questions or comments for Ms. Monterrubio related to the enforcement report? I will note, as we've previewed across many of the program areas, that in August you will likely see a change with regard to the attachment of the overview of enforcement activity, as we mentioned at the top of the meeting, as well as Ms. Sork's executive office report, looking to update this data in a way that is helpful and accessible to everyone. So know that you'll see a change happening in likely in August as it relates to this. Seeing no further, Ms. Nystrom.
Oh, yes, thank you. Ms. Rubio, I appreciate the information, and I to all the staff, I appreciate the expanded information. I'm curious, and maybe not right now, but maybe moving forward, if we could look at on the complaints, just if there were any trends from the pandemic that we saw reported, just to kind of, I know the year probably isn't fully up, but I think it'd be interesting to see if there were more issues that came out of the last year. Look at those data points. Thank you.
I can definitely look further into that. I would say as of right now, we haven't seen a trend due to the pandemic, but I can research that a little bit more and report on that in August.
That would be great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Seeing no further comment of Dr. Harpsheets.
Hi, thank you. I was going to ask Ms. Monterrubio, I noticed that there were, even though we're not through the fiscal year yet, but significantly fewer violations of gross negligence at this point. And I would just like to know if you think that trend will continue, because we are approaching the end of the fiscal year, and any thoughts you have about that.
I'm not sure if we're going to see a trend in regards to the gross negligence, but again, I can report further on that in August.
Okay, great. Thanks. It'll be very interesting.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Harpsheets. Seeing no further board discussion, can we please turn to public comment for this item?
This is the moderator. Members of the public, the Q&A is now open. You can click on that Q&A icon at the bottom right corner of your WebEx screen and type, "I would like to make a comment," and send it to all panelists. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. Board President, no requests have been submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to come back and see if there's any further board discussion on item number 12. And not seeing any hands raised or mics unmuted, we'll go ahead and move on then to item number 13, our Enforcement Committee report. So I'll turn this over to Dr. Phillips, our Enforcement Committee Chair. Dr. Phillips.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fu. We're going to start the Enforcement Committee report with item number 13A, which is a follow-up on the Child Custody Stakeholder Meeting Implementation Plan update. If you recall, we had a discussion regarding exceptions to psychotherapist patient privilege for board investigations during our last meeting and received some fairly spirited feedback. We went back in the Enforcement Committee and revisited that topic to determine how to best clarify why we were making the proposal that we were making. We've relayed some of that information on to some of our stakeholders who took a particular interest in the necessity for the psychotherapist patient, the exception to the psychotherapist patient privilege. Mr. Burke, if you would, could you walk us through the memo?
Yes, absolutely.
Great, thank you.
So good morning. This is John Burke, Assistant Executive Officer. The memo is that Dr. Phillips referred to was a hand carry item. The Board of Psychology has been attempting to address concerns raised by stakeholders regarding the child custody matters in family court. This includes the role of psychologists who are appointed by a court to assist with custody and visitation proceedings. In 2018, the board convened a child custody stakeholder meeting with multiple stakeholders, and the result of this meeting was an implementation plan for those issues identified as being within the jurisdiction of the Board of Psychology. Of the 5 that were identified, 4 have been implemented, and the 5th is what we're discussing today: review and consider statutory language related to documentation considered for child custody complaints. The board's enforcement committee met in 2019 and this year, and 2020 and 2021 and developed language for proposed exception to the psychotherapist patient privilege. Dr. Phillips, sorry, did you want me to simply read the memo or sort of give just a summary overview of its content?
Whichever you think would be most expeditious. I do think the section of the memo that relates particularly to child custody proceedings should probably be read in full, but if you'd like to summarize the rest of it, you're welcome to.
Okay, no problem. So current law. The board's investigations of licensee misconduct often require obtaining psychotherapy records, which an expert then reviews to opine on potential misconduct. A patient's communications with their psychotherapist, including their psychotherapy records, are of course confidential. The patient has a constitutional right to the privacy of their records. Further, the patient holds a privilege to refuse to disclose their records, the psychotherapy patient privilege. These privacy and privilege issues may impede the gathering of sufficient evidence to prosecute licensee misconduct, thereby adversely affecting public safety. If the board has an investigation in which a patient's psychotherapy records are relevant, it may request to review the records, as is their right. Patients may agree or object to the board's request for release. If the patient objects, the board's only recourse for obtaining the records is to formally request them with a subpoena duces tecum, also known as a subpoena for the production of evidence, and then obtain a civil court order enforcing the subpoena. There is no means to enforce such subpoenas through the Office of Administrative Hearings. A civil order from the Superior Court is required. To obtain a civil court order enforcing a subpoena of patient records, a Deputy Attorney General on behalf of the board must first establish that the scope of the subpoena is valid by demonstrating 3 factors to the court. 1, the subpoena inquires into a matter the board is authorized to investigate. 2, the request for information is not too indefinite. And 3, the information requested is reasonably relevant to the investigation. If these threshold criteria are met, the Deputy Attorney General must next provide the court sufficient evidence to allow the court to make a finding of good cause to overcome the patient's constitutional privacy interests in their records. To support such a finding of good cause, the court must be provided with sufficient evidence to allow an independent determination that professional misconduct is likely to have occurred and that the records sought by the subpoena will further the investigation of the misconduct. This analysis is similar to the determination by a criminal court as to whether probable cause exists to support a search warrant. In addition to this good cause requirement, civil courts, guided by subpoena enforcement case law, also require the board to show that it has competing or even compelling interest in disclosure of the records that outweighs the privacy interest of the patient. The Deputy Attorney General must then overcome one additional hurdle in order to obtain a court order enforcing its subpoena, the psychotherapy patient privilege. When the patient has refused to sign a release of or otherwise waive their privilege not to disclose their psychotherapy records, civil courts have declined to issue an order enforcing the subpoena, notwithstanding the board's assurances that privacy will be protected through redactions and protective orders. Therefore, even if the Deputy Attorney General can demonstrate that a subpoena has a valid investigatory scope, and even if the board can overcome the patient's constitutional privacy interest in the confidentiality of their records by providing sufficient evidence of good cause supporting disclosure, i.e. that the records are needed to confirm suspected licensee misconduct, the board is nonetheless typically unable to obtain a court order to enforce its subpoena. Without a civil court order, the board cannot obtain the patient records, and without such records, investigations are likely to remain inconclusive and must be closed. As a solution to this dead end to enforcement of the board's investigatory subpoenas, the committee proposed creating an exception to the psychotherapy patient privilege for board investigations, in no small part due to the issues highlighted by the child custody stakeholders meeting. In 1980, the medical board enacted such an exception to the physician-patient privilege, on which it relies to overcome patient objections to obtaining medical records relevant to its investigations. As a result of the exception codified in the medical board statute, Business and Professions Code section 2225, as well as in a companion statute in the Evidence Code, the medical board is more successful at obtaining court orders enforcing its investigatory subpoenas of patient records, even in cases in which the patient has refused to waive the patient-physician privilege. Because the Board of Psychology has no such exception to the psychotherapy patient privilege for its investigations, it is unable to enforce subpoenas for records needed in its investigations if the patient objects to disclosure of such records. Therefore, under current law, the board regularly finds itself unable to complete investigations. Further, under current law, the board is likely to continue to find itself fighting an uphill battle in subpoena enforcement proceedings, which are costly and time-consuming, place a hard stop on the progress of the investigation into the licensee, and do not serve to protect the public while they are ongoing. Therefore, the committee is proposing the language that's attached. Under the proposed exception to the patient psychotherapist privilege, the patient retains a constitutional privacy right to the confidentiality of their records, as noted above, to overcome a patient's objection to reviewing their treatment records. The board must subpoena the records and satisfy a reviewing court that 1, the subpoena has a valid investigatory scope, 2, good cause supports disclosure, 3, and 3, in some cases, depending on the court, the board has a competing or compelling interest in disclosure of the records that outweighs the patient's privacy interest. If the court finds that the board has satisfied each of these requirements, it issues an order enforcing the subpoena and requiring the provider to disclose the patient's records. Current law and the proposed statute together would ensure that the confidentiality of the patient's subpoenaed psychotherapy records and privacy of the patient are preserved, both during the board's investigation and any subsequent prosecution and disciplinary hearing. Proposed exception to the psychotherapy patient privilege would allow the board to enforce a subpoena and obtain an evaluator's file, which would contain notes from meetings and collateral contacts, testing results, documents submitted by the parties, etc., during a child custody investigation. Currently, in a child custody investigation involving divorcing parents, the non-custodial parent files a complaint about the quality of evaluation or treatment in their minor child by a licensee. The board investigates the complaint and seeks to obtain records of the licensee's evaluation or treatment of the child. Custodial parent refuses to sign a waiver of the psychotherapy patient privilege of their minor child's records. The licensee asserts the psychotherapist patient privilege in declining to provide the records, and the board is unable to obtain the records under current law. It is not clear whether the psychotherapist patient privilege should attach to the records underlying a child custody evaluation when no psychotherapy has been rendered. However, the evaluator or a treating psychologist must often assert the privilege in declining to produce the records sought without a written release from the custodial parent. Proposed exception directly addresses this roadblock to the investigation of complaints against child custody evaluators. And the action requested from the Enforcement Committee and staff is recommends the board approve the proposed language to amend Business and Professions Code section 2918, and that language is attached to attachment A in the hand carry item. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. I would like to add that beyond the child custody situation, there are other situations in which we find ourselves getting feedback, in which we are stymied by the circumstances from getting to records that we would need for purposes of investigation. One example of that might be in situations where we become aware that a psychotherapist has become sexually inappropriate with a client, where the client does not feel that somehow ego dystonic, they're not upset by it. They will often refuse to give us consent to see the treatment records, which we need to look at in order to best determine whether a complaint relating to sexual impropriety or boundary violation is valid. So that's one example of where this privilege, this exception of privilege would also be helpful. Also in situations sometimes where questions arise as to the propriety of treatment received by a minor, if the minor is still a minor, oftentimes we're unable to get the records because the parents or the guardians of the minor are unwilling to sign a release, which might in some way lead to a disclosure of records. It might indicate that something inappropriate has been done by the parent. So there are a variety of other situations in which this exception is helpful. However, this was our, kind of our initial push on this particular exception came and arose out of our discussions as a result of the child custody stakeholders meeting. So that gives you a little bit of background on what's going on. I don't know if anybody wants to make a motion to adopt the language, and then we could have some board discussion.
This is Dr. Kasuga. I move that that we adopt the enforcement committee and staff recommendation to approve the proposed language to amend Business and Professions Code Section 291A.
And I'll second that. This is Leah Tate.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Let's open it up for board discussion. Are there any board members that would like to be heard on this particular subject? Oh, there, Ms. Nystrom.
Hi, I was just curious if, since the medical board has had language to allow them to be able to work with the courts to obtain information, and has there been previous legislation introduced on this issue? Are you aware?
On this issue as to the Board of Psychology?
Correct.
To my knowledge, there never has been.
Okay, just curious.
We ran across in the context of this. I think the medical board may be the only one that has the kind of custom-made exception for purposes of investigation. And apparently it has been a successful exception. They've been more able to get records when they needed them.
Perfect, thank you.
Sure. Any other board comment? Oh, Ms. Riscate?
I just wanted to add to the other situations about also with the minors, if both parents have custody. Another issue we can come across is, would we need both signatures from the parents if they themselves are having issues with each other, but legally they both have custody of a minor? So I just wanted to add that's another situation that I was could think of.
Thanks. That's great. Any other comments from the board? Okay, well, why don't we open this item up for public comment? Ms. Moderator, could you open the comment box, Q&A box?
Yes, this is the moderator. Members of the public, if you would like to participate, click on the Q&A icon located at the bottom right corner of your WebEx screen and type, "I would like to make a comment," and send it to all panelists. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. I do have individual, Jolinder Crow. I will unmute your microphone now. You have been unmuted.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Jolinder Crow. I'm the Chief Executive Officer at the California Psychological Association. We have provided feedback on a similar item earlier, and I wanted to go over just some major points for us. Just starting by saying that I know all of the licensed psychologists on the board, and hopefully the public members as well, recognize that the concept of patient confidentiality and privacy is rather sacrosanct in mental health treatment. And so we have grave concerns about anything that would erode that psychotherapist patient privilege. Regarding the stakeholder meeting, I just want to say again that CPA was not a part of that meeting, nor were, excuse me? Excuse me?
This is the moderator.
Is my mic still on?
Yes, your microphone is still on. Please
All right.
proceed.
Okay. Thank you. And there were also no psychologists who work in the custody space at that meeting. Just some high points. We have said before, and it's still our position, that Family Code 3025.5 already provides licensing boards with access to custody reports. And I believe that the board received a letter from Dr. Bram Friedhandler in November of 2020, in which he explained how people working in this space routinely hand over their custody reports to the courts. We believe that this could actually harm consumers, and the board has the responsibility of consumer protection in California. In your own board materials in November of 2020, and I'm quoting, you said, in your analysis, the staff said, the proposed exception to the psychotherapy patient privilege would allow the board to enforce a subpoena and obtain psychotherapy records in the following situations in which it would otherwise be unable to do so. For example, a patient refuses to disclose records in a sexual misconduct investigation, and then is forced for those records to become public. How is this, we would say, protecting her as a consumer? Judges can order the release of records, as Mr. Burke has outlined, and he has also emphasized that consumers have the constitutional right to privacy. The process is there for the subpoena process because the bar is appropriately high, and you must demonstrate the need for breaking confidentiality. If you cannot demonstrate that, then you should not be able to get these records. If you can demonstrate it, then the courts will let you have the records. We are concerned the broad nature. This is certainly not limited, and I think Dr. Phillips has pointed that out, not limited to just custody cases. And we also believe that confidentiality cannot be guaranteed to records if you were to access them under this proposal. The notion of saying that we will do everything possible to maintain privacy is simply not sufficient. In your own meeting in November 16th in 2020, in your own meeting materials, the staff outlined both pros and cons of taking this step. Now, what we don't see, I don't see that language in your materials this time, but just as an example of 3 different concerns that your own staff had, was a loss of patient confidence in confidentiality of psychotherapy, may cause patients to lose confidence in their treatment or potential treatment. They may even decline to seek treatment altogether if they don't think that their records are going to be private. Another area of concern is potential effect on psychotherapist note-taking. Creating an exception could encourage a psychotherapist who's concerned about the board's potential scrutiny of her notes to censor their contents or to omit mention of therapies and techniques that the board may find objectionable. Alternatively, an unscrupulous practitioner concerned about the quality of her practice may record notes that would omit to record notes that are embarrassing or even exaggerate details of the patient's psychotherapy. And lastly, it could have a very potential chilling effect on patient complainants. Creating an exception to the psychotherapist's patient privilege for board investigations could have a chilling effect that discourages patient from submitting complaints of their psychotherapist's misconduct because the patient may not want to have to risk having to disclose their records without their consent as part of the investigation. So we will just say again that we have serious concerns about anything that would erode the patient confidentiality, patient psychotherapist confidentiality. We believe that a process is in place, and that has been confirmed by both the Office of the Attorney General in previous meetings. And also, we are concerned about these areas of potential harm to consumers that even the board staff has outlined in previous board materials. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jo Linda Crow. Ms. Russell, Ms. Kathleen Russell.
No, excuse me. Before we go to Ms. Russell's comment, I would like to just briefly respond to some of the points raised by Dr. Linda Crow so the board can keep track of what's going on. You are right that there is a process in place, but what the process is we can overcome the hurdle of the constitutional privacy objection. What we cannot overcome is the assertion of the psychotherapist patient privilege. So if that should become an issue in these types of proceedings or any proceedings where we have an investigatory subpoena, we basically get shut down at that point. So we can't get past the privilege otherwise. So we're not creating this to create a secondary avenue to achieve this goal, but it is to have sufficient access under these circumstances to actually be able to get the records, because we're not getting the records if privilege is asserted in these situations, according to our discussions with the Attorney General's office. And you're right, Dr. Linda Crow, both staff and committee members did consider some of the potential chilling effects that this might have. Ultimately, the committee, I believe, determined that that the chilling effect would be fairly minor. This is not something that's going to typically be discussed at the first meeting that you have with a client. It's not likely to come up in very many situations, but the board is very careful when they receive records under an investigatory subpoena to make sure that that information is not public. And if it is put in I think somebody has their microphone on and it's echoing. When it is available to the public, it is available in a redacted form in which both identities and key information is omitted, as you might have experienced when we go through disciplinary proceedings where people are making a petition for to change their probation or other things of this nature. So we do feel like this is a necessary procedure. We don't think the risk to the consumer is substantial. There still will be a court involved determining whether we've somehow gone beyond our brief in terms of what we're going to obtain. So we very much feel that this is a necessary step for us to take, not only to be effective in the child custody arena, but also in other aspects. And I'm sorry I made a guttural noise while you were speaking, which sounded like a commentary on your statement, Dr. Linda Crow, but actually I kicked over a can of Diet Coke, and we all know how much I love Diet Coke, on a Chinese carpet I have in my living room. So I was making a reaction to my own actions as opposed to yours. So my apologies for that. That being said, I think perhaps Ms. Russell had comments. Madam Moderator, could you open Ms. Russell's microphone?
Thank you. She has been unmuted.
Good morning, and thank you to the board and to all those attending the meeting. My name is Kathleen Russell. I am the Executive Director of the Center for Judicial Excellence. And we were the impetus for the stakeholder meeting back in September of 2018. And I do applaud this legislation from the Enforcement Committee and feel that it's a very pertinent and important fix to what really is a consumer safety issue. And so while I appreciate Dr. Linda Crow's concern about the risk to consumer privacy with this, I would beg to differ, and I believe that the risk to consumer safety, and particularly child safety, in the cases that we hear about every day on the front lines of this family court crisis, those are so much more significant. And these are families who have no other recourse for corrupt or unethical custody evaluators who are your licensees, who are often making these reports to the court. And I do need to correct Dr. Linda Crow that this legislative proposal has absolutely nothing to do with the psychologist's submission of their reports to the court. This has to do with the underlying documentation that informed those reports. And I understand from Ms. Mondarubio and others that that underlying documentation is critical to the completion of investigations. And we know that there have been, I believe it's an average of 80 child custody complaints each year that are very often not, they're closed as inconclusive because these custody evaluators are asserting the psychotherapist patient privilege. Incorrectly, I might add, because these are not psychotherapy patients. These are people that are being court ordered to pay for these custody evaluations, sometimes upwards of $80,000 that the couple is forced to pay. And oftentimes, when there are allegations of child sexual abuse or physical abuse of a child, the parent who is making those claims is the victim of domestic violence and has no access to any resources. And so the parent who is the alleged abuser is the one paying the bill to the evaluator. And so you see that there are lots of examples of evaluators who defer and who, make reports minimizing child abuse and minimizing sexual abuse of children. And those are the cases where these court outcomes of children being placed into full custody with a parent who they've reported is beating, raping, or molesting them. They have no recourse. They don't have the resources to file appeals, and the licensing board is their place of last resort. So I do applaud the board for this. I also want to share, as I don't know if I have at a prior meeting, Dr. Linda Crow repeatedly says that she was not included in the stakeholder meeting. And I approached her at one of your meetings in Berkeley many months before the stakeholder meeting to see if she would have lunch so that we could talk about our common ground. And she said basically that we have no common ground. And she denied wanting to connect with me. So this notion that she was excluded from the stakeholder meeting, again, she's never suggested that she was a stakeholder on this particular issue. So with that, I'll just say we applaud this, and it goes a step beyond Family Code Section 3025.5, which only deals with the custody evaluation, and it's an important provision in the law, but we need the underlying documentation to really allow the board to do its job. And this was an issue in an audit as well of the family courts that the state auditor did around underlying documentation for mediation reports in family court. So the underlying documentation is crucial, and we thank you for putting this legislation forward, and we'll do whatever we can once it is introduced in the legislature to ensure its passage. Thank you so much.
Thank you to Dr. Jo Linda Crow and Ms. Russell for their public comments today. I don't see any further comments in the public comment section, so I'll turn it over to you, Dr.
I
Phillips.
apologize. I apologize to interrupt, Board President. We actually do have another request for Colleen Surayas. I will unmute the microphone now.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Colin Suarez, the Director of Government Affairs for the California Psychological Association. First, I would like to request that if the board with this decision to support changes to statute, groups.
Madam Moderator, I'm not sure if I'm just hearing this myself, but I'm hearing difficulty, like a connection issue for this person, and I'm not sure if it's coming in loud and clear on your end. Just I want to confirm so that.
I'm having the same issue. Thank you, Board President.
Could the speaker either improve their Wi-Fi connection or find a stable connection to make comment, please?
Yes, apologies. Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay. So again, this is Colin Suarez with the California Psychological Association. I would ask if the board move forward today that there be workholder groups convened between Board of Psychology, the California Psychological Association, as well as the relevant contacts of the Medical Board of California to establish what parameters were discussed on this. Second, if this is to be legislation that's introduced, I would ask that we wait until the next year of session. As the board may or may not be aware, we are going into the first major legislative deadline of the calendar year. And so any bill that would be introduced would necessarily have to go through a 2-committee process. It could be done beginning in this calendar year, but we feel as though that would be an abrogation of legislative intent. And we feel as though we would need the 6 months to truly work with the Board of Psychology on crafting language that protects both the provider and the patient in a suitable manner. And I don't wish to speak or misrepresent what meetings or discussions were or were not had about stakeholder engagement. However, I can tell you that the California Psychological Association believes strongly at a staff level and the board level that we have not had adequate input on behalf of providers to this item. So while I would ask the board to move forward, if they do move forward, I would request that intensive open dialogue between all of the parties that would be affected, including the providers as represented by the Psychological Association, are included in those discussions. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Moderator, is there further public comment?
No further requests have been submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please. Thank you. So I'm going to turn this over back to Dr. Phillips as chair of the enforcement committee, who can potentially answer any additional questions and open it for board discussion. Also, before we do take any further action, my suspicion is that Ms. Nystrom may wish to make a statement at some point of recusal on this item as well. And so I just want to make sure we flag those two things before further discussion.
Are there any questions from board members or comments from board members?
Dr. Phillips, do you want to go to Ms. Nystrom first, and then I will ask my question?
Okay, great. Ms. Nystrom?
Hi, yes, this is Julie Nystrom. And since we're asking for legislation, I do want to clear that once it enters the legislative process and becomes a piece of legislation, then that's when I will recuse myself. But I think the boundary that we have established with our ledge folks was that as long as it's up to the point that it's in the legislative process, then I can vote and make comments on. And then the only other thing that I wanted to say was I thought the working group proposal to move forward and to keep the dialogue on this legislation to make sure that everybody has, feels like they've had a voice at the table is important. And I would be interested in also having a link to the state auditor's report that one of the commentators had alluded to. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Dr.
Any additional board comment?
Yeah, Dr. Phillips, this is Sayron here. I do have a couple questions and comments, and apologies, Ms. Nystrom, for jumping the gun there on and misunderstanding that position. Just a couple thoughts on engagement with folks. One of the things that I know during my time here on the board has been the work of our staff to work with interested parties. And so my sense is, Ms. Sorick, given the past work of this board, could you provide us some guidance and background on if the board was to move forward on this item, where you would be in terms of the comments we've heard from the public and some board comments to that effect?
Absolutely. Thank you, President Fu. I think at this stage, because of the bill load being cut from the members' rosters, and we are currently in the middle of sunset review, we also have the sexual behavior piece from Senator Pan's bill. I think because this is a 2-year session and because we have those two items and the limited bill load, given those factors, we would not be looking at making this amendment until the February of 2023, and that's when we would seek an author on this. We're also looking at an overhaul of our enforcement statutes. That's been part of a review as we did with pathways to licensure. So there's an opportunity that we could either seek a separate bill as part of this patient privilege, or we could incorporate it into an overall larger kind of omnibus enforcement statutory change bill. That would be however the board would like to move forward, but given the staffing resources that we have and the limitations in the legislature with the COVID restrictions, I would recommend that that's how we would proceed with this change in the statute.
Thank you, Ms. Sorick. And just for clarification, 2022, correct? Not 2023?
No, because we're in the 2-year session, this is the first year of the 2-year session, my thought would be that we would seek this change in the following session after. So because we have sunset and the Senator Pan bill that may spread out over this next couple of years, I just want to make sure that we have the resources to fully support our two existing bills. But again, this is all at the direction of the board. So if the board, feels like we could try and find an author in February of 2022, that's something we can try and do. And if we have the support of Center for Judicial Excellence with us as well, that's something we can try to seek. I just want to throw all the options on the table.
Great, thank you. Did you have additional questions, Mr. Fu?
Yes, I think the other piece, I think this is just more of a question with relation to some of the concerns that were raised, Dr. Phillips. And I'm curious to hear from some of the board members who are practitioners themselves, just how they approach issues like these, with regard to patient privilege and the context. For me, I know I would find that particularly helpful, and not really a question for right now, but as practitioners of our board participate in this discussion, that's something I know I will be carefully listening to on my end.
Certainly, and maybe I could just briefly respond to that. Maybe there's other board members that would like to respond to it. When we initially take in new patients or clients, if it is a question of psychotherapy, we typically talk about the fact that it is a confidential relationship, but we also talk about a myriad of exceptions, the primary exceptions to the psychotherapy patient privilege. And those have changed and morphed to some extent over time with changes in abuse reporting standards and so on and so forth. In my personal experience, I don't think they frankly have much of a chilling effect on the confidentiality of the psychotherapist-patient relationship. I've never had a patient balk at those. In addition to which, generally that's discussed relatively early on, both in writing and orally. And frankly, sometimes it doesn't register with people because they're so anxious to try to address the particular problem they've come to you for. It's not very often in my practice, and I know other practices are different, that I ever have to in any way rely on one of those exceptions. So I think that to some extent goes to your question. I'm curious as to what other board members have to say that are practitioners. Would any of the other licensees like to make a comment?
Yeah, this is Dr. Harpsheets. And I would echo what you were saying, Dr. Phillips, that we do, as part of our informed consent, do go over the exceptions to privilege. And as you said, people are very anxious to move forward. I think the one that I have run into beyond mandated reporting is when someone does file a lawsuit for, say, wrongful termination in an employment situation, and therefore and allege mental distress. And that's the one that I've run into most regularly beyond mandated reports. And there's some similarity, I think, with what we're talking about here, even though the goal is different. But that's what comes to mind for me, and that people typically want their records to be released because they want to prove a point. They want this to happen. So anyway, that's just my comment in terms of my own experience.
Right, thank you. Any other licensees?
Hi, it's Dr. Tate. Again, I would echo what Dr. Phillips and Dr. Harpsheets already commented on regarding informed consent. I have not had an issue with the exception, so I haven't had a bad experience, mandated reporting aside. I have not had a horrible experience with the exception.
And it is part of the informed consent procedure that people know what the primary exceptions to the confidentiality of the relationship are. There's a myriad of other exceptions, actually. We don't discuss every possible exception. It'd be virtually impossible to do so, but we do try to hit the major ones that typically come up in the context of a psychotherapeutic relationship. I also want to mention, this is something, and it didn't reduce itself down to language until more recently, this whole idea of doing something to try to get better access to these records in a child custody proceeding, even for those who chose not to attend the child custody stakeholder meeting, has been in discussion in this board for, I would say, 2+ years at this point. That it was reduced down to a psychotherapist patient privilege, I think became most concrete in this past board meeting. So I don't want to with all due respect, don't want to have the impression created that there's never been opportunity to comment on any of this. Maybe perhaps mistakenly, but the board was under the impression that the California Psychological Association had no interest in attending the child custody stakeholders meeting, and that in bringing it to their attention informally, it was dismissed. But those may be differences in recollection and are probably unimportant at this point. I do think that this is a question that that I think we should move forward on. I think we put a lot of work into doing this in a way that's as respectful of patient confidentiality as we can be, while still allowing us the enforcement function to operate correctly. And I will add, as Ms. Russell alluded to in her comments, that we can get a copy of the child custody report from the court. The problem is you can't really, and as the psychologists on the board know, you can't really evaluate the quality or concerns regarding the child custody stakeholder or the child custody report without having the underlying documentation. And we are stymied in getting the underlying documentation. And that was the impetus in moving forward with this to help improve our enforcement functions. So I hope that allays some fears that to the extent the board members are experiencing them.
Dr. Yeah.
Yeah.
Dr. Phillips, I just wanted to also share my experience in the matter, although limited because I don't really work with child custody cases. However, I do assessments with children, and there are cases wherein there are conflicts between parents involving treatment for clients and diagnostic reports submitted for the clients, and usually in order to resolve those and go after enforcement issues with regards psychologists that do assessments, this could be helpful as well for those cases. So that's kind of like my experience, and I think it will be valuable for that and for children in assessments and treatment.
Thank you very much. Mr. Fu, your hand is up on the screen. You still have you have additional comments?
I just have one more comment, and then pending no further, I would be supportive of a vote. But I think my last comment would just be that, echoing Ms. Nystrom's comment, that the need for stakeholder engagement, and that going forward as we move through the process, to as this board has always done, and I think the continuing professional development is a great example of that. This board has always exemplified that collaborative effort, and I know that board staff and the enforcement committee has done that in the past and will continue to do that. So really just emphasizing as we move forward on this, if this item moves forward today, that the collaboration going into the legislative process will be important, and something that I know I'll be watching. And there are three board members who are current or former legislative staff members and who understand how important that is, as well as the entire board. But that's just my comment on that front. And really do appreciate that the enforcement committee and board staff did hear concerns raised by consumer groups, acted on it, convened multiple partners across different boards and departments in state government together to help articulate that concern and bring forward a proposal in response to that. I think that reflects that feedback loop and that collaboration that is a hallmark of this board. Thank you, Dr. Phillips.
Thank you. Any further board comment? I'm just looking at the little participants thing to see if there's any hands up. I don't see any. So that being the case, I think we should probably call for the vote. Ms. Proto, could you please call the vote?
Yes. Kasuga? Fu?
Aye.
Harb Sheets?
Aye.
Nystrom?
Can I just confirm that the I vote here would indicate that there's also going to be working groups moving forward?
That's not part of the motion.
Okay, then I'm going to no.
Phillips?
Aye.
Riscate?
Aye.
Rogers?
Aye.
Tate?
Aye.
Thank you.
So the motion carries. Mr. Fu, when were you planning on taking did you want to take a lunch break now or later?
Let's go ahead and take it now, since we are at the natural conclusion of an item. So we will recess for about 45 minutes. So we'll come back at, let's just say 12:40 from lunch. So board members, either you can log off or put yourselves on mute. I know our colleagues at Solid will make sure that mics stay muted, whichever is your preference. Just do know that if you log off, to log on a few minutes before to do a mic check. Thank you.